that makes it appropriate to introduce Jaap Nienhuis, who will talk about growth and abandonment in deltaic environments.
Yes. Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. I'm going to talk a bit about the growth and abandonment of deltas and the work I did with Andrew and Liviu at HUI. And the picture you see is a nice example of a growing delta and a previously abandoned delta, as you see in the beach ridges. So what we try to do is to relate the influence of waves and river strength on deltaic morphology. So really first order controls on the morphology of wave-influenced deltas. And we use a simple exploratory model to look at both ends of the delta cycle, so both a growing and an abandoning delta. So to start off with Galloway in 75, he had the famous delta triangle, and he tried to relate sediment input to wave energy flux, and tried to quantify that as well. But those two parameters are difficult to directly relate to each other. So what we propose instead is to do a sediment flux comparison, where we compare the river strength in river bed load in cubes per second with littoral transport by waves. So to relate wave energy to how good waves are in getting sediment away from the river mouth. Also in cubes per second, so you can easily relate those two parameters. What happens if the river bed load is less than the littoral transport of the river mouth? You see on the right a good the function of littoral transport with the wave approach angle. And if the river bed load is less than littoral transport, the deltaic angle will be small and we have a stable delta. If, however, the river bed load is larger than what waves can maximally transport away, it will have a very steep angle, and there's nothing the waves can do to stop the delta from growing and growing. So the first is a wave-dominated delta, a very stable situation in waves basically remove sediment that the river puts at the river mouth, and it's a shape-preserving growth, so it will maintain the angle during growth. The other situation is where the river bed load is more than littoral transport, and that's a river-dominated case, and there's nothing waves can do to stop the river from growing. So our metric is a river dominance factor that will divide river bed load with littoral transport. We try to calculate that for deltas and for our model deltas, so we have a little model to do that. That's Andrew's and Brad Murray's coastline evolution model that is part of CSDMS and has been mentioned before. We divide the plan view delta into cells, and we have a cell that can be filled, and it's a land cell, it can be empty, and it's a sea cell, and if it's somewhere in between, it's part of the shoreline or the coastline. And our delta basically fills a predefined cell with some sediment at a particular rate, so that's our river flux. We define waves with a certain wave approach angle, and with that we can compute the angle the waves make with respect to the shoreline. We can calculate sediment transport based upon that, and that allows us to directly compare wave sediment flux with the river input. If we do that for different deltas, we see on the left a wave-dominated delta with a shape-preserving growth. In the middle, we have a delta that is in between. And on the right, we have something our model doesn't do particularly well at, and that's a river-dominated delta. And there's nothing waves can do to stop it, so it just grow and grow. Well, we don't see those deltas in the left very often in nature, so there's something wrong. What river deltas tend to do when they grow is they bifurcate. So on the left, you see a river with one channel that has a particular ratio of a river sediment load over wave littoral transport. But what happens if you bifurcate the delta, you see that you have the same river bed load for the main channel, but you have potential twice the littoral transport away from each river mouth. So you divide the river dominance factor into 2. If we do that in our model, if we allow bifurcation or branching, we see that has a dramatic impact on the morphology of a developing delta. So in both situations have a river to littoral transport maximum approximately to 1. And in the left you see, or on the right you see a wave-dominated setting appearing. So in theory we have 3 different types of deltas. In blue, where you're always below 1 and you have a shape preserving growth, you have a wave-dominated delta. In green, you start out with a river-dominated delta that bifurcates a couple times and ends up being a wave-dominated delta. Or you end up with a Chaffalai, a wax lake, a type of setting where you have so much fluvial input that you can bifurcate all you want, but you'll never get into a wave-dominated setting. So now we're changing gears a bit and look at abandonment of deltas. So the same picture, you see an abandoned delta, you see the preserved beach ridges. So we were interested in what types of behaviors you can expect if you have a certain delta, you cut off the sediment supply, and what will the waves do? How will waves affect the morphology of a delta? And those types of behaviors you can expect if you have an avulsion or you have river damming. We also used the same model, and we modeled 500 years of growth, and then we shut down sediment supply. And this is the first mode or behavior we found in our model. And that's a very diffusive mode. So at 500 years, we shut it down. You see the shoreline retreating, and it's a very diffusive retreat. What happens if you have a slightly more river-dominated setting? You have a faster growth. You have a steeper angle with respect to waves. And when you shut it down at 500 years, you see a spit developing. So that's can be related to the Ebro Delta you see on the left, with spits that have been developed after a river avulsion. I'll show it one more time. So as you shut down the sediment, you see the spit developing. And it's an intermediate stage of morphology. So eventually, you end up having a flat shoreline again. So we discovered 4 such modes. And we tried to get parameters that allowed us to predict what types of behavior you can expect if you would shut down the sediment supply at a particular delta. And we found that the aspect ratio of a delta flank, so one side of the delta, together with the types of waves attacking that flank, is a good prediction of what type of behavior you can expect as an intermediate delta abandonment mode. So that will lead me to my conclusions. You have river and wave influence that you can quantify based on the fluxes, so the river flux with littoral transport flux, and that bifurcation is important in changing the regime of the river. And furthermore, there are 4 modes in our model that waves, in which deltas can be reworked by waves, and that the reworking type depends on the plan view shape and the wave climate attacking that delta flank. So, thank you.
Questions, please.
Very interesting talk. I have a question. I'm wondering if your model can be generalized to applicate in ebb tidal delta associated with inlet.
So how to potentially put in tidal influence into my delta?
For inlet, for ebb tidal delta type of inlet modeling.
There will be what the model basically does is modeling a shoreline. So we never actually model a river channel. So to have morphodynamics in the river mouth or in the delta channel would be very difficult to implement in this model.
Thanks.
I'm Jaap Nienhuis from the University of Miami. I have a question about the discharge. Do you think it's possible if you have an episodic discharge that could lead to spit forming?
Yes, yes. You have a fast, you have a rapid growth of a delta, and then you get back to a low growing delta. So you end up having shallow equilibrium shorelines again, and that will lead to spit growth, yes. I don't know if the timescales of that episodicity it has to be large in order to get into a good delta regime, but yes.
All right, let's thank Jaap again.